History isn't just about what happened. It's about what happened next. Sometimes the most shocking and, frankly, terrifying stories are the ones that ripple out long after the main event is over. Today, we're going to unpack the unbelievable after effects of three major historical moments. Okay, so let's start with a picture you've probably seen 8,000 times. Ford's Theater, April 1865. We all know President Lincoln, and of course his assassin, John Wilkes Booth. But have you ever stopped to wonder, who's that other guy in the box, the one trying to fight Booth off? His story didn't end that night. In fact, it set off a personal tragedy that would last for decades.
Well, that man was Major Henry Rathbone, a Union officer and a guest of the Lincolns that fateful evening. And for him, the horror didn't stop when Booth leaped onto the stage. Oh no, for him, the real nightmare was just getting started.
The second that shot cracked through the air, Rathbone didn't hesitate. He launched himself at Booth. It was a complete frenzy. Booth pulled a dagger and just slashed Rathbone's arm wide open, from his elbow all the way to his shoulder. But even with that horrible wound, Rathbone grabbed onto Booth's coat, which threw him off balance. That's what caused Booth to injure his leg when he jumped, an injury that made it a whole lot easier to catch him. By any measure, what Rathbone did was incredibly heroic. But here's the tragic twist. He never saw himself as a hero, not for a second. In his mind, he had failed. He believed he should have saved the president. And that one thought, that one perceived failure, became this crushing weight of guilt that would haunt him for the rest of his life and just completely poison his mind. And this is where you can just watch his life completely unravel. 5 years after that night, he's out of the military. He and his wife, Clara, who, by the way, was also in the box with him, they moved to Germany, probably just desperate for a change. But things only got worse. Then, just 2 days before Christmas in 1883, he just snapped. In a fit of insanity, he murdered Clara and tried to kill himself. Henry Rathbone would spend the next 28 years of his life locked away in an asylum for the criminally insane, a direct, horrifying after effect of that one single night in Washington.
Okay, so let's switch gears. From one man's personal psychological hell, we're jumping into a collective nightmare faced by Russian soldiers during World War I. We're talking about Auschwitz Fortress in 1915. So the Germans had been trying to take this fortress for months, and they were getting nowhere. So they decide to unleash something new, something truly monstrous: chlorine gas. Now, the science here is just gruesome. When you breathe this stuff in, it mixes with all the moisture in your lungs and your throat, and it creates hydrochloric acid. It literally dissolves you from the inside out. Horrifying, right? So here's the thing. The Russian soldiers inside the fortress, they had nothing. No real gas masks, no protection. Their only shot was to, well, it's pretty grim, soak rags in their own urine and hold them over their faces. As you can probably guess, it was basically useless against a massive chemical attack. The Germans were sure the job was done. They figured everyone inside was dead. So they started advancing into the trenches, which are still filled with this eerie green gas. And then, something impossible happens. Figures start rising up out of the poison cloud. The Russian soldiers, their skin covered in chemical burns, literally coughing up pieces of their own lungs, rise up, and they charge. And get this, just look at these numbers. The defenders were outnumbered almost 8-1. To the German soldiers, what they were seeing didn't look human. It looked like the dead were rising from their graves to fight them. This moment became known as the Attack of the Dead Men. The sight of these undead soldiers created such absolute panic that the huge German force just broke. They turned and fled in terror, so panicked that some of them ran right into their own barbed wire traps. All right, for our final story, we're leaving the battlefield behind. We're heading to Paris for a haunting mystery that starts in a river and ends, well, it ends in a place you would never, ever expect. Back in the late 1880s, the body of a young woman was pulled out of the river Seine in Paris. Nobody knew who she was, where she came from, nothing. But her story, and especially her face, were about to become immortal. Since there were no signs of violence on her body, her death was officially ruled a suicide. But the thing that captivated everyone was her expression. Even in death, she looked so calm, so peaceful, with this faint little smile. A pathologist at the morgue was so moved by it that he decided to make a plaster death mask of her face, just to preserve her beauty. And this mask, it just took off. Copies of the mask of L'Inconnue de la Seine, the unknown woman of the Seine, became this weirdly popular, morbid piece of art. People would just hang it on their walls in Paris. But her face was destined for something way more significant. In fact, it was about to become the most kissed face in history.
Because this is her face. This is Resuscitate Anne, the world's very first CPR mannequin. Yep, since 1960, millions upon millions of people have learned how to save lives by practicing on a doll with the face of an unknown girl who drowned in a river over 100 years ago. It's just wild. The girl who couldn't be saved has, ironically, become the face of saving lives.
So is it a morbid relic, or is she a life-saving angel? It's kind of both, isn't it? From a president's witness driven to madness, to a chemical attack that created an undead army, to an unknown girl who became the face of first aid. It just goes to show you that the true impact of history is often hidden in these bizarre, unbelievable stories that come after. It really makes you wonder, what other hidden legacies are out there, shaping our world right now?